So, as some of you may know, I have expressed a passing interest in the CW television series The Flash once or twice across the past couple of years. But somehow, that show was not the first time that someone tried to make this character work on TV. Long ago, as the sun began to set on the 20th century, another Flash show premiered, starring John Wesley Shipp, who would later go on to play the Flash's father on the CW. A couple of other actors from the old show returned as well, like Amanda Pays, who plays Tina, and this Mark guy, who I guess was in a couple of sci-fi movies in the 80s or something.
I am your father.
Anyway, the first series aired on CBS, running for one season that began in September of 1990 and ended in May of 1991, and it remained fairly under the radar after that. But I've wanted to watch this show for over a decade now. I've always been curious about it. So, I watched the whole season, and it turns out there are two Flash shows that I think are pretty boring. And look, even though it's inevitable, I don't want to spend too much time comparing these series because they only share a few superficial elements. Also, they're both products of very different media landscapes, especially in terms of comic book adaptations. I mean, the CBS show came out in the shadow of Tim Burton's first Batman movie, and the CW show premiered a year before Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. If you only measure time in Batman-based units, which I did for most of high school, that's like a century. Also, this show is riding Batman 89's coattails so hard that they even brought in Danny Elfman to do the theme song, and it sounds identical. But yeah, the basic setup across both shows is the same. Barry Allen is a forensic scientist who gets struck by lightning and gains the power of super speed, which he uses to fight various wacky criminals around his home of Central City while getting help from scientists in Star Labs and his friends on the police force. I also think it's worth noting that both shows have a doctor sidekick with a dead husband backstory, and in the old show, Barry's other sidekick is named Julio Mendez, and in the new one, there's Cisco Ramon, but those feel more like references than plagiarism. However, in the 90s show, most of these side characters you see were not adapted from the Flash comics, at least not any that I could find reference to. It's also far more grounded than the CW show ever tried to be. But yeah, the structure of Barry's life is very different. For one, he has a dog, and this show surprisingly never has an episode where the dog gets powers. I felt like it was always just about to happen, maybe it's just me. Barry also has two living parents, a brother named Jay, who only lives for about half the pilot, a widowed sister-in-law that the show drops entirely after the pilot, and a nephew who appears very sporadically. Oh yeah, and his dad is played by M. Emmett Walsh, which really threw me off. Speaking of which, this is a great time for everyone's favorite segment, all the random actors I recognized. Obviously, there's M. Emmett Walsh, but there's also Clifton Collins Jr., Mark Dacascos, Jonathan Brandis, Ken Foree, Robert Zadar, Jerry Ryan, and Denise Crosby in the same episode? Very weird. David Cassidy, whose work I'm not familiar with, but he is the father of Katie Cassidy, who played Laurel in the CW universe. It's all connected, guys. I'm not crazy. Also, there's Richard Belzer, who actually appears all over the season, which I did not expect. Oh yeah, and Julio's girlfriend is played by the same actor that plays the therapist in Mr. Robot. That's not like her legal name, but to me, she will always be the therapist from Mr. Robot. And then you've got the really wild appearances like Angela Bassett. Yes, actually Angela Bassett, who plays this nightclub singer with amnesia whose husband is going to be executed by the state because his brother set him up to take the fall for her faked murder. So if you thought this Flash show was any less of a soap opera, I have terrible news for you. And most importantly of all, Bryan fucking Cranston is in this. He plays a mobster who's trying to steal a baby because that's the kind of thing Bryan Cranston was doing on TV in the 90s, apparently.
You know, I do believe you're right about that.
Oh yeah, also that Mark guy, I guess. Whatever, enough about casting. Like I said before, the show's scope is relatively low, especially compared to more modern, wacky comic adaptations. For one, there's nothing inherently special about Barry's powers. There's no speed force, there's no sense of destiny or cosmic purpose. He's just a guy who can move very fast. And he doesn't spend much time moping about the weight of his responsibility. It's all pretty easygoing. There's this one recurring joke where Barry is always hungry because he's constantly burning so much energy, so a lot of scenes will start with him just having eaten a huge amount of food and people around him are trying to be polite about it. I like this bit. It's charming, and the show leans into that kind of perspective on day-to-day functionality with superpowers a lot. However, it also leans into doing interesting things off-screen a lot. The most obvious reason for that is budgetary restraints, but this was not a cheap show to produce. It was reported that each episode after the pilot cost around $1 million, which is nothing to sneeze at. I mean, these days, that's barely a fraction of a Stranger Things episode, but hey, funneling progressively more insane amounts of cash into big-name franchises is always sure to produce better results, right? Right? But money aside, the show isn't exactly pushing the boundaries when it comes to effects work. Most of the speed sequences are just normal shots that are sped up, usually of Barry doing very mundane things. The main running effect is fine, I guess, although it feels a little flat, and only one or two villains involve visual effects to any degree, one of them being Captain Cold, who doesn't hold a candle to Wentworth Miller, by the way. Or what would be a cold candle? A hand fan? Whatever. Oh yeah, and the action is pretty stiff. Barry's signature move is to run up to someone at super speed and then punch them normally, which gets increasingly funny every time it happens. And most of the villains are just normal guys, although a surprising amount of them are coded as old-timey mobsters for some reason.
You. Keep your pants on, talent.
Flash? The Flash interceded? Yes, Mr. Moses. If we are making any allegations, please talk to my lawyer.
Maybe it's a conscious throwback to the early days of the character on the page. I feel like I always see images of 1940s superheroes fighting like gangsters in suits, that kind of vibe. Or maybe this show just doesn't know how to present a character without making them a cartoonish exaggeration of a cliched aesthetic. Either one is equally believable. Speaking of character, let's talk about our main one. Now, since my only real point of reference for this guy is the CW show, I'm not going to get into how accurately this show adapts the character from the comics, because I don't really know what that character is, and given that the Flash has existed in some form or another for the better part of 80 years, I don't think there's any one answer to that. But as for this Barry Allen, I don't know, he's fine. When I was about halfway through the season, I started to feel like he doesn't really have any flaws. Or maybe that's not the right phrasing. He doesn't really learn anything, or ever have to. I mean, sure, some episodes have generic morals about helping people who need it, but scene by scene, Barry is just kind of good at everything. He doesn't have any personality traits that hold him back from being a hero in ways that he learns to overcome. He's not awkward, and he can adapt to pretty much any situation. He never seems to be out of place, and he never feels like he's going up against a real challenge. Also, he never really has to struggle with balancing his normal life and his life as the Flash, which is not to say that every superhero story needs that, but when you watch 22 episodes of a guy doing everything right and everything going well, it starts to get a little stale. I mean, sure, I guess his brother does die, but that's like 45 minutes into a 19-hour-long experience. That's not what sticks out. It is important, though. It's the reason why Barry gets motivated to use his powers to fight crime. Jay's death is basically his Uncle Ben moment, or more accurately, his Wayne's getting gunned down in Crime Alley moment. And the memory of Jay does get brought up quite a bit early in the season, especially in relation to Barry's father, Henry, who Spider-Man, what? Who Barry has a pretty rocky relationship with. Both Henry and Jay were street cops, facing Spider-Man directly. What am I saying? Facing criminals directly, while Barry went into the crime lab, which his father views as lesser.
You be careful out there, honey.
I will.
What you gonna do, stub his toe on a footprint?
Every conversation the two of them have goes something like that, until the requisite episode where Barry and his dad have to team up, and Henry learns that maybe there is some value in being able to read or whatever. How heartwarming. But again, because Barry never really feels out of his depth, and because the supporting cast who aren't Barry's sidekicks tend to disappear for long stretches of time, the feeling that any real conflict or growth is happening is rare. The only area that does seem to face any kind of turmoil is Barry's love life, which gets even more play here than it did in the CW series, impossible as that might seem. But this show doesn't have a central love interest. I mean, Barry and Tina have this will they won't they thing going on, but their whole relationship is so weird. Barry basically just stumbles into her office when he gets powers to ask for help, and then 4 episodes later she starts referring to him as her best friend.
You may be my best friend, but you've become my worst patient.
And they always seem to be going out on dates, even though Barry tries to date every woman he comes across. Barry's most interesting relationship is with this private investigator named Megan, who is initially digging up dirt on him so a local politician can blackmail the Flash into helping him take over the business dealings of, you guessed it, a cartoonish mobster. She shows up a few more times after that, mostly alongside that Mark guy, and she's a fun presence. I like her. You know, I like everyone in this show just fine. I like the sidekicks, I like the comedy relief cop duo, I like the dog, I even like the mobsters. But it would be a challenge for me to name a single personality trait for any of them. Characters on this show are drawn very broadly and tend to be examples of either pure good or pure evil. The show does gesture towards more nuanced ideas like corruption in the police or the military, but the villainous characters who exemplify that are still cartoons, and are either surrounded by other cartoons or immediately turned on when their true nature is exposed. I would go so far as to say that there aren't any real characters here, just gimmicks.
Can a man take fire in his bosom and clothes not be burned?
And look, I'm not saying this show had to be a slow, pondering trudge through the ramifications of police brutality to be good, but I think it has a very shallow perspective, and because the show can't fall back on being funny or dramatic or even impressive through visual innovation, there's not much to push you forward to the next episode. The show is not confronting anything in any meaningful way, or pushing the characters anywhere near their limits. It is, I think, intentionally cozy, episodic fluff, but fundamentally unchallenging as a result, and it's lacking any real hook outside of the idea of the show being about the Flash, a famous comic book character. And I guess back in the 90s, when there were far fewer superhero shows and movies per year, that was enough. I mean, I guess that's still the case now. And to be fair, it's not like more recent adaptations of this character have been more artistically valuable, but at least they've had the courtesy to be so batshit crazy that you kind of wonder where they're going with it. Honestly, my most succinct summary of this show is that it's just a generic police procedural with a slight sci-fi bend. And that's why I'm not surprised it only ran for 1 season. Even when it goes into higher concept territory like time travel, it's just this generic post-apocalypse because an evil guy took over the city, and Barry has to make sure it never happens, which he obviously does. Actually, let's talk about this specific evil guy, because the Flash does sort of have a nemesis on this show. His name is Pike, and he first appears in the pilot as the leader of a biker gang called the Dark Riders, very creative, who have essentially brought the city to its knees. Pike himself used to be a cop, and he was actually Jay's partner, until he was ousted from the force and decided to take his revenge by blowing stuff up, destroying the city.
In the days of Genghis Khan, a disloyal warrior was tied to a wild horse and then set free.
Being evil, basically. He just wants to be evil. Also, Pike is the one who kills Jay, so there is a personal connection between him and Barry, and after Barry takes him down, he disappears for a while. In a later episode, Pike gets let out on a legal technicality, and it seems like he's going to be a more recurring problem. He starts messing with Barry, and he orchestrates this plan to kill the Flash without knowing that the Flash and Barry are one person, which is what ends up sending Barry through time. Basically, he's running very fast, and he gets hit by a missile, which results in time travel somehow. I'm not sure about the math on that one. Anyway, in the future, Pike has somehow become mayor and has turned the entire city into a fascistic nightmare, overrun with crime and poverty. While Barry is trapped in the past, he helps this underground resistance fight back and eventually returns to the present, where he's able to force Pike to admit to killing Jay on a recording and gets him re-arrested. And then Pike is never mentioned again, and given that this show's universe was eventually folded into the CW's during Crisis on Infinite Earths, I guess he just blew up one day. So yeah, that's Barry's nemesis, some guy with a scar on his face who rides a motorcycle and shows up for 2 episodes. That's as deep as it gets. And sure, maybe he would have shown up in future episodes if the show had gotten renewed, but would anyone have really cared if he did? Okay, I feel like I'm complaining too much. There is some decent stuff in here. For one, I like Central City. Through all the bizarre characters that Barry encounters, the city itself does develop a certain charm, and different episodes explore a wide array of locations, so there is at least a sense of some variety. It's not just like the same hallway over and over again. I also like that these stories tend to be written in a way that frames Barry's actions as being explicitly about protecting people who need help, not just fighting bad guys. It's a nice touch, and the connection he has with everyday people around the city feels stronger as a result. You believe he's a hero that people would like. And that's pretty much it for the positive stuff. It just doesn't make much of an impression, especially because if you take out the superpower bits, you don't really have much of interest at all. There are a few episodes that go a little nutty, like when Barry has to help a robot assassin who's gone rogue escape her creators, but this con man he knows starts using her to cheat at gambling, which is such a sudden escalation in tone and stakes that I was definitely paying more attention. But just because an episode is marginally more insane doesn't make it good.
Oh my God, did you see that? Did I see it? That ain't no mutt. That dogzilla!
It just doesn't have much going for it. It's not a very interesting take. I can't really recommend checking it out unless you enjoy generic 90s television, which is fair. I was born in 98, so I feel very disconnected from this era of TV. It all feels very removed from what I've experienced, even nostalgically. And I don't know if anyone else has ever pointed this out, but TV has changed quite a bit since 1990. So by the standards of the time, maybe this is a home run. But I think if it was, there would have been at least a second season. So yeah, that's all I really have to say about this show, and I wish I'd had nicer things to say, but that's life. You know what? No, I've got one more good thing. I'm glad this season happened, because I think it's nice that John Wesley Shipp was able to come back to this world, embody this character again on the CW in so many different ways, and get a career boost so much later. I think that's a cool thing that happened. Oh wait, actually, one more thing. I'm convinced that someone working on this show was either professionally linked to or just a big fan of Twin Peaks, because there's so much crossover. I mean, with actors alone, Dick Tremaine, Renault, and that agoraphobic guy all show up.
I'm here at Big Ed's Tattoo on the Central City Wharf. Rumor has it that the Black Rose women frequented this parlor. Any comment, Big Ed?
Also, the episode with the agoraphobic guy is literally called Twin Streaks. This is obvious to everyone, right? I'm not crazy.
Just you.